The Sea Remembers. Chapter 1. The Tide Returns. The room smelled of whiskey and rain. He hadn't slept. The sheets were still warm from her, though she'd left before dawn. The wind from the harbor pressed at the window, rattling it softly, as if the world outside was trying to remind him that morning had come whether he wanted it or not. He thought that was the end of it. Then came the knock. "Who is it?" he called. "You know," she said. Her voice carried through the door, low and steady. He opened it, and there she was again, hair wet from the rain, eyes bright, coat unbuttoned, a faint tremor in her jaw like she'd been running. "I forgot my umbrella," she said. "You never had one." She smiled a little. "Then I forgot that too." He stepped aside. She came in without waiting to be asked. The air between them was heavy, like the seconds before thunder. He poured what was left of the whiskey into 2 glasses. She didn't touch hers. "I thought you said goodbye," he said. "I did." "Then why are you here?" She shrugged. "Maybe I wanted to see if I could mean it." He looked at her, really looked. She hadn't changed much. Same sharpness in her face. Same small scar above her lip, the one he used to trace with his thumb. There was something quieter in her now, though, like she'd stopped trying to win against the years. Outside, the rain deepened, filling the silence between them. He sat on the edge of the bed. She remained standing. "What do you want from me, Clara?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. "Just to see the sea again." He almost laughed at that. "It's still there." "I know," she said. "But sometimes you have to look at something to be sure it hasn't left you too." She moved to the window. The glass was fogged, but the faint outlines of the harbor lights trembled beyond it. "Come with me," she said. He should have said no, but there were still pieces of her in him that refused reason. He reached for his coat instead. The rain had softened by the time they reached the harbor. The sea was flat and gray, stretching out under a low, tired sky. Fishing boats rocked against their moorings, and the smell of diesel drifted in slow ribbons across the water. She walked ahead of him, her scarf pulled close, her steps careful on the slick planks. He watched her move, remembering the way she'd once run down this same pier barefoot, laughing into the wind, before they'd ruined each other in the quiet ways lovers often do. "You look the same," he said. "I don't," she answered. "You just remember me that way." He caught up beside her. The tide was turning, slow and deliberate, pulling at the ropes like something alive. "I shouldn't have written," he said. "No," she said. "But you did." The wind shifted. Somewhere, a bell rang from the end of the pier. It sounded old, tired, like it had been waiting for them all these years. "I kept thinking I'd see you here," he said, "even after you left." "I did come back once," she said. "When, years ago, you were gone." He looked at her, but she didn't meet his eyes. "You could have called." "I could have," she said. "But that's not what we were ever good at." A gull dove into the water, then rose with something wriggling in its beak. She watched it absently. "What are we doing, Henry?" she asked. "Walking," he said. "Don't be cruel." "I'm not." He paused. "You're the one who wanted to see the sea again." She turned to him then, her eyes sharp, bright with something between anger and ache. "I didn't come for the sea," she said. "I came to see if you'd still follow." He didn't answer. There was nothing in words that hadn't already been said and undone between them. They reached the end of the pier. The wind came hard off the open water, snapping at their coats. The horizon was a thin line of iron. She looked out. "It's strange," she said. "You think you can come back to a place and find yourself again. But the place changes too." He nodded. "Everything does." They stood in silence, the sound of ropes straining, the low hum of an engine starting somewhere out of sight. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "You still live in that house above the hill?" "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." "Still painting?" "Not much." She turned to him then, her face softer. "I kept one of yours," she said. "Which one?" "The one with the storm over the cove. You said it was unfinished." "It was. It still is," she said. "That's why I like it." The tide lapped higher, washing small ripples over the wood beneath them. The sound was steady, rhythmic, like breathing. He wanted to say something, something that might close the distance between them, but the moment passed. "I should go," she said finally. He nodded. She began to walk back down the pier, her red scarf bright against the gray morning. He watched her until she was nearly gone, then called out softly, "Clara." She stopped but didn't turn. "Will you come back?" he asked. The wind carried her answer away. He stood there a while longer, listening to the slow pull of the sea. When he finally turned to leave, The rain began again, fine and cold, as if the sky itself refused to let go. Chapter 2. The Letter. The rain came harder that afternoon. It struck the windows in thin, persistent lines, as if the sky had grown tired of holding anything back. Henry sat at the small table in his kitchen, watching the drops slide down the glass. The harbor below was a gray smear, the boats rocking like restless sleepers. His coat hung by the door, still damp. The smell of salt and whiskey lingered in the air. He hadn't eaten. He'd meant to, but his hands wouldn't stop moving, lighting cigarettes, putting them out, reaching for things that weren't there. He kept thinking of Clara's face as she turned from him, the red scarf vanishing into the mist. He wanted to believe she was gone again for good, but he knew better. He found the letter 2 days later. It was early morning, and the storm had finally broken. The air smelled clean, almost metallic, and light came through the window in a narrow beam, catching dust in slow motion. He'd gone to his studio, a small room above the kitchen where he hadn't painted in months. He stood before the easel, staring at the unfinished canvas that had once meant something. A storm over the cove, the horizon slanted and wild. He remembered the day he'd painted it. She had stood in that very doorway, her hair tied back, her voice teasing him for making the sky darker than it needed to be. The canvas was turned to the wall now, and when he moved it aside, something fell to the floor. A thin envelope, yellowed at the edges. He picked it up, thinking it might be old receipts or sketches. Then he saw the handwriting, hers. Clara. His heart made a small, hard sound inside him. He sat down and turned the envelope over in his hands. It wasn't sealed. The flap had been folded once, then tucked in, the way she used to close things quickly when she changed her mind. Inside was a single page, written in her sharp, careful hand. He unfolded it slowly. Henry, I came back once. You weren't here. The house felt smaller, though I know that's not true. I sat in the kitchen and watched the harbor until it went dark. You had a bottle open on the table, and I thought about drinking from it, but I didn't. It felt wrong to take something you hadn't offered. I don't know what I came to find. Maybe proof that what we had wasn't only something I imagined. The world has its ways of erasing people, you know. Sometimes I think memory is just a trick we play to keep from drowning in what's gone. If you ever read this, I hope you've forgiven me. Not for leaving, but for returning too late. See, he read it twice, then a third time. Each word seemed to sink into him slowly, like a tide rising over stone. He put the letter down on the table and sat there, staring at it. His throat felt dry. It wasn't dated. That bothered him. Had she written it years ago, during that first return? Or had she slipped it there the night she came to the hotel? He tried to remember whether she'd gone near the studio. He couldn't. He'd been watching her too closely to see what she might have left behind. The room felt smaller now, as if her presence had returned with the letter. The air carried her scent, faint lilac, worn thin by time. He stood and looked out the window. The sea was calm again, that deceptive calm it wore between storms. He thought about the things he might have said to her, small, ordinary things that would have cost him nothing and might have changed everything. He'd never been good with words. He'd always thought silence was cleaner. Now silence was all he had. That evening, he took the letter down to the harbor. The light was soft, gold slipping into blue. The town had quieted. Even the gulls were still. He walked to the end of the pier where she had stood days before. The boards creaked under his weight. He unfolded the letter again, letting the wind play with its corners. He thought about burning it. He thought about throwing it into the sea. Instead, he folded it once more and slipped it into the pocket of his coat. A fishing boat came in slow, the engine humming low, steady. He watched it dock, watched the men step off, laughing, shouting to one another. It felt like another world. He turned toward the hill where his house stood, small, whitewashed, a single light burning in the window. He began to walk back. Halfway up, he stopped. There, near the old path, something red caught his eye. The scarf. It hung from the branch of a windswept tree, wet and tangled. He stood there for a long time, rain beginning again in fine threads. The scarf twisted in the wind like a flag that had lost its country. He didn't take it down. That night, he couldn't sleep. He went back to the studio and set the storm painting on the easel. He opened a bottle of wine, but didn't drink. The room was quiet except for the sea, steady and patient below. He stared at the unfinished sky, then dipped his brush into the dark blue paint that had dried along the edge of the jar. The first stroke came hard, uneven, but sure. Then another. Then more. By morning, the storm had found its shape again. Chapter 3. The Visit. He heard the knock just after midnight. At first, he thought he'd dreamed it. The wind was strong again, pushing against the house in long, hollow breaths. But then came another knock, soft, deliberate, as though whoever stood there already knew he would answer. Henry set his brush down. The paint on the canvas was still wet, the storm unfinished, though the sky in it had begun to move again. He wiped his hands on a rag and crossed the room. When he opened the door, she was there. Clara stood on the step, hair damp, the red scarf gone. Her face was pale in the lamplight, her eyes tired but clear. She looked like someone who had been walking for hours and had finally reached the edge of what she could bear. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "I know. Then why did you?" "I couldn't sleep." He stepped aside. She entered quietly, her boots leaving small, wet prints on the wooden floor. He closed the door behind her. The wind pressed once more against the window, then fell away. She looked around the room, the canvases stacked against the wall, the brushes, the faint smell of turpentine. "You started painting again," she said. "Something like that." "Because of me?" "Because of what's left," he said. She smiled, small and sad. "That's not much to build on." "It's enough," he said. He poured her a drink, though she didn't ask for one. She took it without looking up. The sound of the sea below reached them through the glass, low and steady, the pulse of a world that refused to stop. "Did you know I'd left something here?" she asked. "The letter?" She nodded. "Yes," he said. "I found it. Too soon or too late?" "I don't know. Does it matter?" She sipped the whiskey, her hand shaking slightly. "I didn't mean for you to find it like that," she said. "How else could I have found it?" "In person," she said. He looked at her for a long time. "Then say it now." She set the glass down carefully. "I came back because I wanted to see if there was still a way to be forgiven." "For what?" "For loving you wrong." He felt something tighten in his chest. He turned away, walking to the window. The harbor lights flickered faintly in the mist. "There isn't a right way," he said. "There's only the way we had." She moved closer, stopping a few feet behind him. "You always talk like that," she said softly. "Like you're still trying to make it sound clean." "It was clean once," he said. "No," she said. "It was never clean. That's why it mattered." They stood in silence. The air between them held the weight of things unsaid. He could hear the slow rhythm of her breathing, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, restless, uncertain. "You found the scarf," she said finally. "Yes." "You didn't take it down?" "No." "Why not?" "I thought maybe you'd come back for it." Her face softened. "Maybe I did." He turned then. She was close, too close. Her eyes searched his, and for a moment neither spoke. "Do you want to stay?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." He nodded slowly. She reached out, brushing her fingers against his hand, just enough to feel the warmth there. It wasn't tenderness. It was something rawer, recognition, maybe, or surrender. The clock on the wall ticked once, then again, steady as breath. "You kept the letter?" she asked. "Yes." "Where?" "In my coat." "Good," she said. "Then it's not lost." She stepped back and looked at the painting. The storm was dark, alive, the sky fierce with movement. "You finished it," she said. "Almost. It's better than before." "It's not what I meant it to be." "It never is," she said. He watched her trace the air near the canvas with her hand, as if following the lines of something invisible. "You know," she said, "when I wrote that letter, I thought you'd already stopped thinking about me." "I tried," he said. "And it didn't work." Her eyes glistened faintly. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," he said. "We're the ones who make it hard." She smiled faintly. "I used to love that about you." Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere below, a door slammed against the dock. The moment thinned. "I should go," she said. He nodded. "Will you?" "Yes." "When?" "Before dawn." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "Henry," she said, without turning, "don't keep waiting for me." "I won't," he said. They both knew it was a lie. She stepped into the night. The wind caught the door, then closed it softly behind her. He stood there, listening to her footsteps fade along the path. When he finally turned back to the studio, the lamp flickered once and steadied. The painting stood in the center of the room, the storm complete now, the horizon breaking into light. He looked at it for a long while, then reached for his brush again, not to change it, but to sign his name in the corner. Chapter 4: The Walk Home. The road from the hill wound down toward the harbor, then up again toward town. It was narrow and slick from the rain, shining faintly under the low lamps that burned through the fog. Clara walked slowly, holding her coat closed with one hand. The wind came off the sea, sharp enough to make her eyes sting. She didn't look back at the house. She didn't have to. It was still there behind her, the faint square of light in the window, steady and small against the dark. Each step made a soft sound on the wet ground. She thought about the first time she had walked that road. Years ago, when the evenings were longer, and she still believed that love was something you could carry without breaking. Back then, she had worn a white dress and no shoes. Henry had followed behind her, laughing, a bottle in his hand. The wind had been warm then, and they had stopped halfway down to watch the fishing boats drift out under a red sky. Now the same path felt older. The air smelled of rust and seaweed, the way things smell when they've survived too much salt. She passed the tree where her red scarf still hung, twisted and heavy from the rain. She stopped, looked at it, then left it there. It seemed right that something should remain to mark where they had come undone. When she reached the harbor, the lamps along the pier flickered weakly. A single boat rocked at the far end, its mast knocking against the wood in a slow rhythm. The sea was calm again, though it moved with the heavy patience of something that remembers storms. She sat on a bench and watched the water. The tide was coming in, whispering against the posts. For a long time she didn't move. Her hands rested in her lap, cold and still. She thought of the letter he had found and the way he had looked when she mentioned it, guarded, as if every word in it had cut a little deeper than she'd intended. It hadn't been a love letter. It had been a confession. There's a difference, she thought. Love asks. Confession offers. She wondered if he understood that. He'd always wanted things to have meaning. Paintings, silences, even the way she held a cup. But meaning could break a person faster than the truth. She looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly, though not from the cold. You still love him, she said aloud. The sound startled her. It felt strange to hear the words spoken into open air after holding them inside for so long. She stood, brushed her palms against her coat, and began to walk again. The streets of the town were empty. Windows glowed behind curtains, soft squares of yellow. Somewhere a dog barked, and then the sound was gone. She stopped by the old bakery. It was closed now, but she could still smell the faint sweetness of bread in the stone. The scent made her think of mornings when she and Henry had shared coffee there, quiet and easy, before everything became too large for words. She had thought she would forget those things, the way he stirred his cup twice before drinking, the way he turned his wrist when lighting a cigarette, but memory was stubborn. It held on even when reason didn't. At the edge of town, she paused. The road ahead curved inland, toward the inn where she had left her suitcase. She thought about going there, sleeping for a few hours, taking the morning train out. But her feet turned her back, toward the harbor instead. She found herself standing by the water again, near the place where the boats came in. A lantern burned low on the dock. The reflection shimmered across the black surface of the sea, breaking into thin ribbons of gold. She leaned on the railing and watched the tide push closer, folding over itself like breath. The sound was soft, steady, familiar. It felt like the sea was talking to her in a language she had once known but had forgotten how to answer. She closed her eyes. For a moment she saw his hands, the way he had held the brush that night. Steady, deliberate, as though painting might be the only way left to tell the truth. When she opened her eyes again, the light had shifted. The horizon was pale with the first line of morning. She straightened her coat, drew in a deep breath, and began to walk toward the station. Far above the harbor, Henry still sat in his studio. The lamp burned low, throwing soft gold over the canvas. He hadn't gone to bed. On the table beside him lay the coat he'd worn at the pier. The letter was still in its pocket. He reached for it, unfolded it once more, and ran his thumb along the edge of the paper. He looked at the signature, C. and thought about what that single initial carried. Whole years, entire rooms of silence, one short lifetime of what-ifs. He set it down carefully, beside the brush and the empty glass. Outside, the sea moved with its slow, certain rhythm. He stood by the window and watched the path that wound down toward the harbor. He couldn't see her now, but he knew she was somewhere on that road, walking. And though he'd promised not to wait, he stood there anyway, until the first light of dawn reached the edge of his window. Final chapter, the Book of Echoes. The sea kept its sound. It rose and fell through the mornings, steady and patient, as if the world had never changed. Days passed. The light shifted. The house on the hill grew colder at night. Henry painted a little each day, not much, just enough to keep his hands busy. The storm on the canvas was finished now, but he left it on the easel, as though it were waiting for something more than a signature. Sometimes, when the wind came off the water, he thought he could hear her footsteps again. He would look up, half expecting to see her at the door, the red scarf bright against the gray light. But it was always the wind. It was always the sea. He learned to live with that. A week later, the postman brought a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. It had no return address, only his name written in her hand. He took it inside, set it on the table, and looked at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a thin book bound in blue linen, the corners worn, the pages yellowed with salt. On the first page, in her handwriting, was a title, The Book of Echoes. He turned the pages carefully. Inside were fragments, lines, phrases, small pieces of their years together, written in the plain, spare way she spoke when she was most honest. The sea never forgets. What we call silence is only what we refuse to hear. Love isn't a flame. It's a tide. At the end of the book, a single page carried only this: there is nothing left to forgive. He closed the book and sat very still. The sound of the sea filled the room again. That night, he carried the Book of Echoes down to the pier. The air was cool and clear. The moon hung low, and the water caught its light in broken silver. He sat on the edge of the dock and read from the book until the wind lifted the pages. The words were simple. They said nothing new, but they were hers. When he reached the last line, he let the book fall into the water. It floated for a while, turning slowly, then sank. He stayed there until dawn. In the weeks that followed, he painted again, not storms, but small, quiet things. The curve of a shell, the light on the harbor, a single red scarf caught in a branch. He painted the sea as he saw it now, still restless, but merciful in its forgetting. People in town said he seemed better, calmer, though his eyes still carried a kind of distance that couldn't be named. He didn't mind. He had learned something about distance. It wasn't always a measure of loss. Sometimes it was the space that let a person breathe again. Spring came. The vines on the hill grew green. The harbor filled with boats returning from the south. One evening, he walked to the end of the pier and stood where she had once stood, hands in his pockets, coat open to the wind. The sea was calm. He watched the horizon fade into the slow red of sunset. The air smelled of salt and lilac. He said her name once, not loudly, just enough for the wind to take it. And for the first time in a long while, the silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt like something answering.